Hi, welcome to my channel, Basics and Weapons, where I talk about everything from martial arts, acrobatics, and martial arts weaponry. My name is Koji, and in this video I'm going to do a tutorial for my stretch routine that I use to maintain flexibility or improve it for splits and high kicks. The main reason why I'm doing this tutorial is mostly because during my time as both a gymnast and a martial artist, I've been asked the same question a multitude of times: how am I so flexible? How do I kick so high? Interestingly enough, I've been asked the exact same question by members of the cosplay community as well, due to my depiction of Fox MacLeod from the Nintendo game Star Fox. And my answer to that question is a very specific stretch routine which I use as a warm-up or to maintain or increase my flexibility in my legs for splits or high kicks. Now, before we begin, I want to say that when doing these stretches, I would like to advise everybody to be very careful and know your limits, because if you push too hard during these stretches, you can actually severely injure yourself. Also, with all these stretches, depending on whether or not you want to use them as a warm-up or to increase your flexibility, I would say using them as a warm-up, hold the stretches for around 10 to 15 seconds, while if you want to use them to increase flexibility, I would say hold them for longer than that, probably around 30 seconds each. Now, without further ado, let's begin the tutorial. Alright, now that you can see exactly how useless my backdrop truly is and how cramped my apartment really is, let's begin the stretch tutorial. The first stretch that I'm going to show is a very simple one, and it's one I usually start out with all the time, and that is a front fold to touch your toes. So what you want to do here is you want to actually bend with your hips, not with your back or waist. Usually when I teach this stretching routine to people, or if they're learning for the first time, they assume that it's flexibility in your back. Really, it's flexibility in your hips. And you know you're doing it right when you feel like you're kind of pointing your butt towards the sky. Also, make sure that your legs are straight. You're not going to be able to feel the stretch if your knees start bending, so make sure that they're as straight as possible. I'll now demonstrate the stretch. You want your feet to be about hip width apart, and you're going to just reach down, bending at your hips once again, and touching your toes, just like this. If you're feeling that you're more flexible enough, you can actually reach down and put your palms against the floor as well, making sure that your legs are straight once again. One of the things that I actually like to do to make sure that my legs are straight is I actually reach down and grab my ankles, and then I use my elbows and put them against my knees to keep them straight. So that what that looks like is this. Reach down, grab my ankles, put my knees and my elbows together, and it keeps them straight. And I feel the stretch going all the way up the back of both my legs. Now, the key thing when doing that particular version is not to use your elbows to push on your knees, just to keep them in place, because you don't want to actually dislocate your knees or tear something by pushing them too far. There are two other variants of the stretch, and that is to do one leg at a time, which looks like this. All you're doing is a similar position, but you're going to take 1 foot length step outwards, and you're just going to stretch and reach down to the toe of the forward foot. And this is better for people who aren't as flexible enough to do it with both feet together. So all you're doing is taking 1 step out, reaching forward, and I would usually take one hand, put it on the knee, and then reach forward and touch that toe. If you're not feeling enough stretch in the legs, you can always kind of push yourself back a little bit, and you'll be able to feel the stretch in one or both legs. The only downside to that version of the stretch is you gotta do each foot at a time, and that just takes up more time, so I like to do them both together. The other variant would be to do it with your feet apart. Now, with this version, you want your feet to be about just outside your shoulder width apart, and then you're gonna reach down and touch both hands to the ground, like so. Just like the other stretch, you want to bend at your hips and not with your spine or your waist. And when you touch down, make sure that your toes and your knees are pointed directly forward, and then kind of push yourself back a little bit. You don't want to push yourself too far back, you just want to be able to push back far enough so that we actually feel the stretching in both legs. Alright, now we're going to move on to lunges. This is also very basic, and if you've done gym class in high school, you're probably going to be very familiar with this type of stretch. So for a lunge, you just want to take 1 foot forward, 1 foot back. This one is going to go really far back, as far as you can, to the point where you start feeling the stretch both on top of this leg and below this one. This one, you don't want to go farther bent than 90 degrees, because after that, then you're no longer going to be feeling the stretch in the back of your leg. But if you do this right, you're going to feel both stretch in back of this leg, in the muscle on top here, as well as the groin and a little bit in your hips as well. Also, make sure you keep your back up. You don't really want to lean forward. want to try and keep your chest up, back straight, and just lower yourself down. This one you want to do on both sides as well. The other variant to this would be a deep lunge, and that is where you take the extended leg and you put your knee down to the ground, and you're going to want to rock forward a lot more to get the same effect. You're going to feel a stretch here and here, as well as in the groin and your hips. The only reason why I don't really do deep lunges myself is because, like I mentioned before, I sustained a pretty severe knee injury on this knee, so that's not something that I enjoy to do, is putting my knee on the ground and putting my weight on it. The other lunging technique would be a side lunge, and it's going to kind of be the same concept. One leg is going to be bent, one leg is going to be extended, but as opposed to one going back, the extended one's going to go out to the side essentially. So what that looks like is you're going to put all your weight on top of one leg, bend down, and essentially try and sit your butt on your heel, and you're going to extend this foot out to the side, making sure that the toe and the knee is pointing up towards the sky, and you're just basically kind of sitting down towards the ground, but not actually sitting, because you want to be able to have this space underneath here so that you have room for the leg to stretch. And this is a good stretch for the entire leg, as well as all the way up through the groin as well. And this is another stretch you want to do on both sides. So other side, then go down. And for these stretches, you only want to hold them for around 10 to 15 seconds as a warm-up. If you're using them to increase your flexibility for splits or kicks, I would probably suggest holding them for around 30 seconds before taking a break. So now we're going to move on to two more stretches while standing, and these ones are going to focus mostly on the muscles in the groin for if you were to say gain flexibility to do side-to-side splits. Most of the ones that we've been doing so far have been focusing mostly on the hamstring and the muscles right on top of the leg as well. This first stretch is actually going to be very similar to the front fold and touch with the feet spread apart, except we're not going to be stretching the backs of our legs or hamstrings. In fact, we're going to be now stretching our groin, which means that the footing position is actually going to be much wider. Now, the foot position is actually going to vary between people dependent on how flexible you actually are. You want it to go pretty much around where you start feeling the stretch, and that's when you're going to start bending over to touch the ground. So I will quickly demonstrate. I'm going to just put my feet about this far out, toes and knees pointed forward, and then I'm going to bend at my hips and essentially try and touch my entire forearm to the ground. This may vary between people, like I said, depending on how flexible you are. Some people may not be able to get your entire forearm to the ground, but that's usually what I strive for when doing the stretch, because the lower I reach, the more stretch I'm going to feel in my groin. So I will quickly now demonstrate. Go forward, reach down, forearms to the ground, and then try and push back a little bit. The more you push back, the more you're going to feel stretch. So I still actually feel stretch in my hamstrings, but this is also still a good stretch for your groin, especially the further you move your legs out, the more you're going to feel the stretch in your groin as well as the backs of your legs. All right, the last stretch that I'm going to demonstrate before we move on to stretches that you would do on the floor would be a horse stance. Now, if you're a martial artist, you've probably done this stance as a form of building the muscle strength in your legs for endurance, which is one way to do it, where you just sit here with your legs bent at a 90-degree angle, back straight, chest up, and keeping your arms either up or to the side, and that would help build endurance in your legs. But to use this as a stretch, essentially you're going to do the same pose, but you actually want to space your feet out much further, bend down into the same position, and then actually push your knees outward with your hands, and that's going to make the horse stance a great stretch routine for your groin. One of the reasons I like the horse stance stretch so much is that it can be easily used in a very quick warm-up kind of a stretch routine that I do all the time before I'm about to perform kicks for demonstration. And that's because while doing the horse stance, I can stretch out my groin and then easily turn it into some kind of a side lunge, and that gives me a quick warm-up and stretch for both my groin and my hamstrings, so that I can do quick demonstration for some high kicks, or like during my Star Fox photo shoot, to have some high kicks really quickly and hold them for a prolonged period of time so that the pictures are taken correctly. Alright, now we're going to be moving on to stretches that you can do while sitting down. Some of these are going to be actually very similar to the ones I just demonstrated standing up, but you can also now do them sitting down just if you don't feel like standing. Alright, for this next stretch is going to be actually very familiar to the one we did at the beginning of this video, and that's because it is a front fold and toe touch, but we're now doing it sitting. Now, doing it sitting I actually find is much easier because while standing, you gotta make sure that you keep your legs straight because they can bend easily, but when you're sitting, I feel like the floor supports you a lot better as opposed to standing. Also, for this one, all you wanna do is not only can you just reach forward and just simply touch your toes like the regular routine, you can also still grab your ankles and use your elbows to support your knees to keep them from coming up. Some key things for this stretch that you wanna make sure you're doing is, once again, bending at your hips, not with your back or your waist. And you want to reach forward and grab either your foot or your ankles, and then try and reach forward, get your elbows to touch your knees. Also make sure that the knees and toes are pointed directly upwards, otherwise you're not going to get the stretching effect that you want if they're turned outward or in any other weird direction. It's just not going to work. So I will demonstrate once again. Bend forward at your hips, grab either your toes or your ankles, and then try and reach forward and touch your elbows to your knees, and you should get the full effect of this stretch. This next stretch is actually going to be very similar to our stretch that we just did, and that is the front bend and toe touch, but with your legs spread apart. This one is actually going to have the exact same effect, and once again, the only difference is that you're sitting. So basically, you just want to sit down, stretch your feet apart as far as you can, and this stretch is actually really good, not only stretching for your hamstrings, but also stretches your groin at the same time. So this one is actually better than doing it standing because you get more use out of it. So like the stretch while you're standing, you want to actually bend forward and try and touch your entire forearm to the floor, as opposed to standing up and dangling down and touch your forearm. You're doing it sitting, so you actually have to reach further, which gets you a little bit more stretch in both the groin and your hamstrings as well. And this all happens at the same time, which makes the stretch really effective. So I will demonstrate. I'm going to keep my legs spread apart. The distance will vary between people who are more or less flexible than others, and just want to keep your hands together or apart and reach forward and try and touch your forearms to the ground. And it's fine if you can't touch your forearms to the ground immediately, but try and strive for that, because then it's going to make you stretch a lot more, because you're going to constantly reach down further and further and further until your elbows finally touch the floor. Now, while we're in this position, there are two variant stretches that'll help stretch your hamstring, and those are also toe touch stretches, but you're doing them one at a time. Now you can do the stretch either with both legs spread out, and you're just going to reach forward, grab your toe, put one hand on your knee, and try and lean forward and almost essentially look like you're trying to reach forward and kiss your knee. That's how far you want to bend your face forward and your chest. The other variant to this stretch is to do it with one foot tucked in at a time. Doesn't matter which way you do it, it's going to get the exact same effect because you're just going to be doing it one leg at a time anyways. Alright, now we're going to move on to the final stretch. This one is actually really good for your groin, and this is the one I do the most when I want to increase the flexibility in my groin for either better kicks, whether it be like a side kick, or just for side splits in general, because I've never truly had side splits myself, only the front and back. So this is a stretch I actually did a lot for both a warm-up to increase my flexibility, or just to stretch myself out after a workout routine. But like the lunges, if you did gym in high school or in school in general, or if you do yoga, you're going to be pretty familiar with this stretch, but we're going to be adding a little bit more to it to kind of intensify the stretching. So for this, you just want to kind of like the sitting cross-leg, except you want your feet to come together and touch, and you want them to be as flat as possible. Don't turn them outward in any direction because you're not going to get the right stretching effect. So make sure that they're both together, bottoms touching, and to keep them together, you want to wrap your hands around them and grab to keep them completely flat, but also take your elbows and push them down on your knees, and that's going to help create the stretch in the groin. But at the same time, you want to pull your feet back towards you and then bend forward, and all this is going to really stretch out your groinal area, and it can be actually pretty dangerous if you go too far. So make sure that you know your limits so you don't hurt yourself or tear a muscle. I had a friend who did stretches like this for a very, very long period of time, and then he went straight into training his kicks, and he almost tore his hamstring. So make sure that you know your limits and be safe when doing these. But like I mentioned before, if you're using these stretches as a warm-up, probably only hold them for about 10 to 15 seconds before taking a break. But if you are doing these stretches to increase your flexibility, you can hold them for around 30 seconds, but I would probably suggest that you don't go into some kind of a workout routine, or if you're a martial artist, a kicking workout, because then you run the risk of pulling or tearing a muscle, which I have a lot of my friends have torn hamstrings as a result of that. So once again, let me demonstrate this stretch. You want to keep the bottom of your feet flat together, hold them with your hands, elbows on your knees, pull them back, and then lean forward. You want to hold them for about 10 to 15 seconds. And then what you're going to do is you're going to relax, but also let your legs bounce a little bit. And you want to do this for about 5 seconds if you're doing this stretch for about 10 to 15. If you're doing it for 30 seconds, probably let them bounce for a little bit longer, just so that your muscles can get loosen up a little bit. But then you want to go back into the stretch again. All right, and that is my tutorial for my stretch routine that I use to either maintain or increase flexibility in the legs for splits or high kicks. This video has really been a year in the making, mostly due to procrastination, but like I mentioned earlier, I sustained a rather severe knee injury, and that has kept me out of training, and as a result, my flexibility has actually diminished greatly. But since I started training again and getting back into the swing of things, I thought this would be the most appropriate time to finally get this video recorded. I also quickly like to say, please be careful when doing these stretches, really know your limits, and if you think that you're not doing these right, seek help from a professional, and they might be able to even help you with more stretches to increase or build your flexibility in a safe manner. But that is all I have for this video. Thank you for taking the time to watch it. Train safe, have fun, and I hope I'll see you in the next one. Take care now.